On the rooftop helipad of the Hudson Tower in downtown Manhattan, a sleek black helicopter sat gleaming in the morning sun. Carlton Westbrook, immaculately dressed in a tailored Italian suit worth more than most people's monthly salary, leaned against the aircraft with a predatory smile. His entourage of associates formed a semicircle around him, their expensive watches catching the sunlight as they laughed and clinked champagne flutes. The rooftop party had been going for hours, celebrating Carlton's latest territorial acquisition with flowing alcohol and boastful stories. A door opened, and the building's janitor stepped onto the roof, pushing her cleaning cart. Claire Harrison kept her head down, sandy brown hair tucked beneath her uniform cap as she quietly tried to navigate around the gathering to reach the utility closet. One of Carlton's lieutenants spotted her first, nudging his boss with a smirk. "Hey, boss. Looks like the cleaning lady wants to join your celebration," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, triggering a wave of cruel laughter across the assembled group. Carlton's ice-blue eyes narrowed as he studied the janitor, her shoulders hunched in the ill-fitting uniform. Something about her quiet dignity irritated him, a stark contrast to the fawning sycophants surrounding him at his command. "Tell me," Carlton called out, his voice cutting through the wind and chatter. "Have you ever seen the city from above?" He gestured toward the helicopter with a theatrical sweep of his hand, the diamond cufflinks on his sleeve catching the light. Claire froze, her grip tightening on the handle of her cart as she reluctantly turned to face the group. Her hazel eyes betrayed nothing, though a muscle tightened almost imperceptibly in her jaw as she assessed the situation. "No response? Come now. Don't be shy," Carlton taunted, stepping away from the helicopter and approaching her with deliberate, predatory steps. "I'm offering you the ride of a lifetime. All you have to do is fly it yourself." The laughter grew louder as Claire's gaze shifted to the Bell 407, her expression unreadable. Carlton's smile widened as he produced the keys from his pocket, dangling them before her like bait to a trapped animal. "Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you," Carlton declared mockingly, his voice dripping with condescension. His associates howled with laughter, some nearly choking on their champagne at the absurdity of the proposition. Claire remained still, her eyes now locked on the helicopter rather than on the man taunting her. Something flickered across her features, not embarrassment or fear as Carlton had expected, but something far more dangerous. Calculation. "What? No takers?" Carlton pressed, stepping closer until he towered over her. "Surely you must have dreams beyond scrubbing toilets. This could be your Cinderella moment, from rags to riches with one little flight." The wind picked up, whipping around them as Claire finally met Carlton's gaze directly. Her eyes had hardened now, revealing a steeliness that momentarily caught him off guard, a glimpse of someone entirely different from the meek custodian she appeared to be. "I'll do it," she said quietly, her voice carrying a controlled precision that seemed oddly out of place. Without waiting for a response, she walked past Carlton, brushing his shoulder as she approached the helicopter with steady, confident steps. The rooftop fell silent as Claire climbed into the pilot's seat with practiced ease, her movements suddenly fluid and precise. She settled into position, adjusted the seat with familiar motions, and began the pre-flight check with methodical efficiency. Carlton Westbrook had taken control of his family's criminal empire at just 23 after his father's mysterious death. 4 years later, he controlled half of Manhattan's underground, ruling through calculated violence and strategic alliances that kept his enemies in check. Behind closed doors, Carlton maintained a facade of legitimate business through his real estate company, transforming abandoned properties into luxury developments. The penthouse office suite where he conducted business was his fortress, a glass and steel monument to his power. Claire Harrison had been hired 3 months ago as part of the night cleaning staff, her background check revealing nothing more interesting than a spotty employment history. She worked quietly, efficiently, often volunteering for the overnight shift when the building stood empty. What the background check failed to reveal was Captain Claire Harrison, formerly of the U.S. Army Special Forces, decorated pilot who had flown combat missions in the most dangerous airspace in the world. Her discharge papers remained classified, her service record sealed by officials at the highest levels. Each night as she cleaned his office, Claire meticulously documented Carlton's operation, photographing documents left carelessly on desks and recording conversations through devices hidden in air vents. She was building a case, gathering intelligence for an operation years in the making. Carlton had noticed her, of course. He noticed everything in his domain, but he had dismissed her as insignificant, another invisible service worker beneath his concern, too focused on her duties to be anything but part of the background scenery of his empire. He never saw how her eyes tracked the movements of his security team, identifying weaknesses in their patrol patterns. He missed the way she studied the blueprints of the building left on a construction table, memorizing every exit and entrance, every security camera blind spot. What Carlton saw was a woman approaching 40, her beauty faded by years of hard labor, someone who posed no threat to his operation. What he didn't see was the coiled strength beneath her uniform, the combat reflexes honed by years in war zones. Claire had been watching Carlton for weeks, learning his routines, his habits, his weaknesses. She knew about his penchant for public humiliation, his need to dominate those he considered beneath him, the cruel streak that emerged when he had an audience. She had planned to remain invisible for at least another month, gathering the final pieces of evidence needed to bring down his entire network. But now, sitting in the pilot's seat of the helicopter, Claire realized the timeline had accelerated, forcing her hand earlier than expected. Carlton stood frozen on the helipad, his mocking smile fading as he watched Claire go through the pre-flight sequence with practiced precision. His associates had stopped laughing, an uneasy silence falling over the group as they realized something was very wrong. "Is there a problem, Mr. Westbrook?" Claire called out, her voice carrying clearly over the growing sound of the rotors as they began to spin. The meek janitor was gone, replaced by someone whose posture and confidence radiated authority. The wind from the rotors whipped around them as Claire brought the engine to life, the distinctive whine growing louder as she adjusted the controls. Her hands moved with muscle memory, 15 years of flight experience taking over as naturally as breathing. Below them, traffic crawled through Manhattan streets as Claire expertly lifted the helicopter from the helipad, rising smoothly into the morning sky. Through the glass, she could see Carlton's shocked expression, his perfectly controlled world suddenly spinning out of his grasp. 3 days after the rooftop incident, Carlton sat in his penthouse office, watching security footage of Claire's perfect takeoff and landing for the 20th time. He had ordered a complete investigation into her background, furious at being made to look foolish in front of his associates. The helicopter demonstration had lasted only 15 minutes, but in that brief time, Claire had executed maneuvers that only the most skilled military pilots could perform. She had returned to the helipad, shut down the aircraft with professional precision, and walked away without a word. When Carlton's security team moved to intercept her, she had simply handed them her ID badge and resignation letter. "Consider this my 2-week notice," she had said calmly, then disappeared down the stairwell before anyone could react. The investigation had hit multiple dead ends, with government databases returning redacted files and classified warnings. What little they had uncovered pointed to special operations training and combat deployment in locations that made Carlton's blood run cold. A knock at the office door interrupted his thoughts, and his head of security entered, holding a thin folder. "We found something," he said, laying photographs on the desk showing Claire in military uniform, standing beside a helicopter identical to Carlton's in a desert landscape. Carlton studied the images, noting the confidence in her stance, the hardness in her eyes that he had glimpsed briefly on the rooftop. This was no ordinary janitor. This was someone dangerous, someone who had deliberately infiltrated his organization. The storm that had been brewing all morning finally broke, lightning illuminating the Manhattan skyline as rain lashed against the windows. Carlton poured himself a glass of whiskey, considering his options as thunder rolled overhead, mimicking his darkening mood. "Sir, there's more," his security chief continued, hesitation evident in his voice. "We found surveillance equipment in the air vents of your office and the conference room. Professional grade, military issue. She's been gathering intelligence on the organization." Carlton hurled his glass against the wall, crystal shattering as amber liquid splashed across imported wallpaper. His carefully constructed world was under threat. His enemies would smell weakness if word got out, and his leadership would be questioned. "Find her," he ordered, voice dangerously quiet. "Whatever it takes, whatever resources needed. I want her brought to me, alive and unharmed." The unspoken command hung in the air. This was personal now, a matter of respect and survival. Across town, in a sparse apartment rented under an alias, Claire was packing equipment into waterproof cases. The operation had been compromised earlier than planned, but she had gathered enough evidence to proceed with the next phase. Her phone vibrated with an encrypted message. "Extraction compromised. Maintain cover. New instructions forthcoming." Claire deleted the message, knowing that her handlers at the agency were scrambling to salvage years of undercover work. A news alert flashed across her laptop screen. A warehouse fire in Brooklyn, one of Carlton's distribution centers. Territory wars were breaking out across the city as rival families sensed disruption in the Westbrook organization, vultures circling at the first sign of weakness. Claire closed the laptop. Decision made. With extraction support delayed, she would need to adapt, perhaps even use Carlton's interest in her as leverage. The game had changed, but the objective remained. Bring down the Westbrook crime family from the inside. Rain pounded against the windows of Carlton's private car as it crawled through Manhattan traffic toward his mother's brownstone in the Upper East Side. The weekly dinner was a tradition he maintained despite their complicated relationship, his mother being the only person who could still make him feel like a chastised schoolboy. Eleanor Westbrook, formidable matriarch of the family, greeted her son with critical eyes that missed nothing. "You look terrible," she declared, taking his rain-soaked coat and noting the tension in his shoulders as he stepped into the warmth of her home. Over dinner, served by silent staff, Carlton found himself uncharacteristically distracted, pushing food around his plate, while his mother recounted the latest society gossip. His mind kept returning to the mysterious woman who had made a fool of him on that rooftop. "You're not listening to a word I'm saying," Eleanor finally snapped, setting down her wine glass with precise control. "This is about a woman, isn't it? I can always tell when you're obsessing over something, or someone, you can't control." Carlton considered lying, but his mother had an uncanny ability to detect deception. Instead, he gave her the sanitized version of events: a new employee with an unusual background, a challenge issued and unexpectedly accepted, a demonstration of skill that didn't align with her supposed history. Eleanor's eyes narrowed with interest as she studied her son across the candlelit table. "You're investigating her because she surprised you, or because she humiliated you in front of your men?" she asked, cutting directly to the heart of his wounded pride. The intelligence report on Claire Harrison lay in Carlton's briefcase, woefully incomplete despite his resources. Her military service records were classified beyond even his reach, with only fragments available through his contacts in government bureaucracy. "Both," he finally admitted, watching the rain streak down the dining room windows. "She was gathering intelligence on our operations, professional surveillance equipment hidden throughout the building, focused primarily on my office and meeting rooms." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, her diamond earrings catching the candlelight as she considered the implications. "Have you considered that she might be more valuable as an ally than an enemy?" she asked, always the pragmatic strategist behind the family's rise to power. Back in his penthouse that night, Carlton spread the intelligence file across his desk, staring at the grainy photograph of Claire in desert combat fatigues. According to the partial records, she had piloted extraction missions in contested airspace, earning multiple commendations for valor under fire. What the file didn't explain was why such a decorated officer would end up pushing a cleaning cart through his building, or why she would risk exposing herself with that helicopter demonstration. There were missing pieces to the puzzle, connections he couldn't yet see. His phone rang, the night security team reporting movement at one of his warehouses in Queens, possible infiltration by an unknown party. The security footage showed a shadowy figure disabling cameras with expert precision, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Though the figure's face remained hidden, Carlton recognized the efficient movement patterns, the calculated precision that he had glimpsed on the rooftop. Claire was making her move, targeting his operation directly instead of merely gathering intelligence. By morning, 3 more facilities had been breached, crucial ledgers missing, digital systems compromised. No alarms had been triggered, no guards injured, just critical information extracted with surgical precision by someone who clearly knew his security protocols intimately. As reports flooded in from his lieutenants, Carlton realized he was witnessing not random attacks, but a coordinated dismantling of his operation. Claire wasn't working alone. This level of synchronized action required resources, planning, and institutional backing. The abandoned waterfront warehouse had once been a distribution hub for Carlton's organization, before operations moved to more secure locations. Now it served as neutral ground, chosen specifically for its isolation and multiple exit points as he waited for Claire to arrive. The message had been simple, delivered to her known aliases through channels that would alert her without revealing his hand to potential federal monitors. Mutual interest discussion. Come alone or not at all. Attached coordinates and a time. Midnight, when the industrial district stood deserted. Carlton had arrived early with only his most trusted lieutenant, positioning himself where he could watch all entrances while remaining partially concealed behind stacked shipping containers. The warehouse's broken windows allowed the half-moon to cast fractured patterns across the concrete floor. At precisely midnight, the side door opened, and Claire entered alone, dressed in black tactical gear rather than her janitor's uniform. She moved with predatory grace, scanning the shadows methodically, her right hand resting near what Carlton assumed was a concealed weapon. "Impressive security breach last night," Carlton called out, remaining in shadow but making his position known. "4 facilities, no alarms triggered, no digital footprints. You've caused quite the stir among my associates, who now question my ability to protect our interests." Claire pivoted toward his voice, her expression revealing nothing as she tracked his movement behind the containers. "Your security was adequate against common threats," she replied, her voice carrying the same confident precision he remembered from the rooftop. "But you're facing something entirely different now." Carlton stepped into a shaft of moonlight, deliberately exposing himself while his lieutenant remained hidden with a clear line of sight. "Captain Claire Harrison, Special Forces, decorated combat pilot. At least that's what the unredacted portions of your file suggest." Her eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication that his intelligence had surprised her. "And you're Carlton Westbrook, who inherited a modest gambling operation and transformed it into one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises on the East Coast through strategic violence and political corruption." The warehouse fell silent as they assessed each other across the moonlit space, predators recognizing a worthy opponent. Carlton noted how she maintained awareness of her surroundings despite their conversation, never fully turning her back to any potential threat. "What I can't determine," Carlton continued, circling slowly to maintain distance, "is why a highly trained special operations officer would spend 3 months cleaning toilets in my building when she could be flying combat missions or working private security for triple the salary." Claire's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth, only calculation. "Perhaps I wanted to observe the man whose organization has laundered over $4 billion for terrorist cells operating in 3 continents, providing them with weapons, infrastructure, and diplomatic cover." The accusation hit Carlton like a physical blow, so wildly inaccurate yet delivered with such conviction that he momentarily lost his practiced composure. "Terrorism? You've gravely misunderstood the nature of my business, Captain Harrison." "Have I?" Claire took a step forward, moonlight revealing the intensity in her eyes. 3 months ago, a shipment left your Brooklyn warehouse containing modified drone components that were traced to an attack on a civilian hospital in Kabul, killing 17 children and 9 medical staff. Carlton's mind raced as he processed her accusation, the implication sending ice through his veins. The shipment she referenced had indeed left his warehouse, but the manifest had listed agricultural equipment bound for a legitimate customer in Dubai, or so he had been told. "If what you're saying is true," he replied carefully, "then someone is using my infrastructure without my knowledge, which means we potentially have a mutual problem that requires immediate attention." The early morning light filtered through the blinds of Carlton's secure penthouse as Claire examined the shipping manifests and financial records spread across his dining table. After their warehouse confrontation, they had reached an uneasy alliance built on mutual self-preservation. "Your father's former associate, Gregory Palmer, has been using your distribution network for 3 years, Claire explained, pointing to highlighted transactions that connected seemingly legitimate businesses. "He established parallel channels within your organization, compartmentalized so effectively that even your financial team missed the diversions." Carlton studied the evidence with growing fury, recognizing the elegant deception that had been operating under his nose. Palmer had been his father's closest advisor, helping young Carlton navigate the transition of power after his father's death, positioning himself as a loyal conciliere. "Palmer attends my mother's Sunday dinners," Carlton said quietly, the personal betrayal cutting deeper than the professional implications. "He walked me through my first negotiation, taught me how to shoot, gave me advice when my father died, all while systematically undermining everything I've built." Claire watched his reaction closely, assessing the genuine shock and anger that confirmed her suspicion. Carlton had been an unwitting participant in Palmer's operation. The intelligence community has been tracking these weapons shipments for years, but Palmer's network was too well insulated to penetrate through conventional methods. Outside the penthouse windows, Manhattan was coming alive with morning traffic, unaware of the seismic shift occurring in the power dynamics of the city's underworld. Carlton poured himself a drink, despite the early hour, processing the revelation that threatened everything he had built. "Why come to me instead of taking this directly to your handlers?" he asked, studying Claire over the rim of his glass. "With this evidence, Federal agencies could dismantle my entire organization along with Palmer's operation, which I assume was your original mission. Claire hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The situation is more complicated than a simple criminal investigation. Palmer has cultivated protection at the highest levels of government. Any attempt to move against him through official channels would be compromised before it began. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. She was operating without official sanction, possibly even against orders. You've gone rogue, Carlton realized, seeing her in a new light. You're risking your career, possibly your freedom, to pursue this independently. Not rogue, Claire corrected, her voice hardening. The mission parameters changed when I discovered the extent of Palmer's government connections. My team was recalled, the investigation officially closed, but I couldn't walk away knowing what those weapons shipments were enabling. Carlton nodded slowly, understanding the moral imperative that drove her, so different from his own code yet equally uncompromising. So you continued alone, using my organization as your vehicle to gather evidence against Palmer, never intending to expose my operation unless necessary. A notification on Claire's secure phone interrupted their conversation, a message that drained the color from her face. Palmer is accelerating his timeline, she said grimly, showing Carlton the alert. A shipment is being prepared right now at your Queens facility, weapons components disguised as medical equipment. Carlton was already moving, accessing his security system to verify the unauthorized activity at his warehouse. The camera feeds showed Palmer's men loading crates into unmarked vans, bypassing the normal security protocols through access codes that should have been restricted. If that shipment leaves the country, the components will be assembled within days and deployed against a civilian target in Singapore, Claire explained, already checking her weapon with practiced efficiency. We have less than 3 hours to intercept it before it reaches international waters. Carlton made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of his organization, reaching for his secure phone to call in his most loyal enforcement team. Then we move now, he said, his voice carrying the authority that had made him feared throughout the city. Palmer doesn't just threaten your mission. He's compromised my entire operation and made me complicit in atrocities I never authorized. The waterfront shipping facility loomed dark against the night sky as Claire and Carlton positioned themselves on an adjacent rooftop. 2 hours had passed since they'd intercepted Palmer's weapons shipment, replacing the deadly components with tracking devices and harmless decoys. Raindrops pelted against their tactical gear as they watched Palmer's men loading the last crates onto the cargo ship. Through high-powered binoculars, Carlton observed his former mentor directing operations, completely unaware that his carefully orchestrated plan had been compromised. He taught me everything I know about this business, Carlton said quietly, lowering the binoculars. The negotiation tactics, security protocols, even how to identify undercover agents, all while planning to use my infrastructure for terrorism. Claire glanced at him, noticing the subtle shift in his demeanor over the past 24 hours. The arrogant Mafia boss who had mockingly offered marriage on that helipad was evolving into something more complex before her eyes. People aren't always what they seem, she replied, thinking of her own deception. Sometimes the masks we wear become so comfortable that we forget who we really are underneath. Carlton's phone vibrated, his team confirming they had successfully intercepted a second shipment at his Brooklyn warehouse. Everything was proceeding according to their hastily assembled plan to dismantle Palmer's operation, while preserving Carlton's legitimate business interests. Growing up, my father was rarely home, Carlton said unexpectedly, his eyes still trained on the docks below. Palmer was the one who attended my high school graduation, taught me to drive, showed up when it mattered. Claire remained silent, recognizing the rare moment of vulnerability from a man who had built his reputation on calculated ruthlessness. The revelation humanized him in ways she hadn't anticipated when she'd first infiltrated his organization. Rain intensified as they made their way back to Carlton's armored SUV, the mission complete for now. Their shoulders brushed in the confined space of the vehicle, an unexpected electricity passing between them despite their complicated circumstances. As they drove through the empty streets, Claire noticed Carlton's hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white with tension. A man accustomed to absolute control, now finding himself adrift in unfamiliar waters, forced to trust someone who had infiltrated his world under false pretenses. The dashboard clock glowed 3:17 a.m. as they passed closed storefronts and darkened windows, two souls awake in a sleeping city. Something about the liminal hour stripped away pretense, leaving only raw truth between them in the quiet confines of the vehicle. Lightning briefly illuminated Carlton's profile, revealing a vulnerability that contradicted everything in his intelligence file. The calculated crime lord now showed glimpses of the boy, who had sought approval from a father figure who ultimately betrayed him, a parallel that wasn't lost on Claire. "Why did you leave the military?" Carlton asked as they drove through deserted streets, windshield wipers beating a hypnotic rhythm against the glass. "Your record, what little of it isn't classified, suggests you were on track for further advancement." Claire stared out at the rain-slicked streets, weighing how much truth to reveal. "A mission went wrong," she finally said. "Intelligence failure led to civilian casualties, a village of 38 people who shouldn't have died." Carlton nodded, understanding the burden of collateral damage all too well. "And you couldn't continue after that?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "I could have," Claire admitted, surprising herself with her candor. "That's what terrified me, how easily I could compartmentalize and move on to the next mission. I left because I was afraid of what I was becoming." The silence between them grew charged with unspoken understanding, two people who had walked different paths, yet somehow arrived at a similar place, neither entirely good nor entirely evil, just human, with all the complexity that entailed. When they reached his penthouse, Carlton hesitated before exiting the car, turning to face her fully. "Whatever happens with Palmer, whatever comes next, thank you for showing me the truth," he said, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking garage, Claire saw something unexpected in his eyes, not the cold calculation of a criminal mastermind, but the genuine gratitude of a man confronting difficult truths about someone he had trusted implicitly. The betrayal came at dawn, 3 days after they had intercepted Palmer's shipment. Carlton's security chief burst into the penthouse conference room, where Claire and Carlton were reviewing financial records, his face ashen. "Palmer's men just took your mother," he reported breathlessly. Eleanor Westbrook had been ambushed while leaving her weekly hair appointment, her security detail neutralized with military precision. The message delivered to Carlton was simple: return the intercepted shipment by noon, or never see his mother again. "He's desperate," Claire observed, already pulling up building schematics on her tablet. The tracking devices show the decoy shipment arrived at the destination, which means his buyers are expecting delivery within hours. Carlton's face had hardened into an expressionless mask, but Claire caught the slight tremor in his hands as he placed them flat on the conference table. "He's holding her at my father's old hunting lodge upstate," he said, pulling up satellite imagery on the main screen. Without discussion, they moved into action with synchronized efficiency, Claire coordinating with her limited agency contacts, while Carlton mobilized his most loyal enforcement team. Their unlikely alliance had solidified into something formidable, her tactical expertise complementing his intimate knowledge of Palmer's psychology. "The property has multiple access points through dense forest," Claire explained, as they suited up in the penthouse armory. "Palmer will expect you to come in through the main road with negotiators and heavy backup. Standard protocol for a hostage situation." Carlton checked his weapon with practiced ease, a skill Claire hadn't expected from someone she'd initially dismissed as a pampered crime lord. "But we're not following standard protocol," he replied, understanding her strategy immediately. "We insert by helicopter to the northern ridge, approach on foot through the tree line, and enter through the service entrance," Claire confirmed, securing her tactical vest. "Two-person infiltration, while your team creates a distraction at the main gate." The Bell 407 waited on the rooftop helipad, the same helicopter that had started their strange journey together. This time, Carlton didn't watch in shock as Claire performed pre-flight checks. Instead, he moved alongside her with focused determination, following her instructions without question. As they lifted off into the morning sky, the Manhattan skyline receding behind them, Claire realized how completely their dynamic had transformed. The arrogant boss who had mockingly dangled keys before her was now sitting beside her as an equal, their lives literally in each other's hands. 3 minutes to drop point, Claire announced as they approached the densely wooded area surrounding the hunting lodge. "Remember, Palmer's specialty is psychological manipulation. He'll try to divide us by exploiting our different motivations." They touched down in a small clearing, the rotor wash bending the surrounding pines as Carlton secured the helicopter. Moving swiftly through the underbrush, they approached the property from the blind spot Claire had identified in the security perimeter. Palmer had posted guards at all visible entrances but had overlooked the old game preparation room, its separate entrance hidden by years of neglected landscaping. Claire disabled the rudimentary alarm system while Carlton watched her back, both moving with the silent communication of experienced operators. The hunting lodge's interior smelled of pine and gunpowder, memories embedded in the wooden walls that had witnessed decades of Westbrook family history. Claire cataloged each detail with military precision. 3 guards in the main hall, communications equipment in what once served as a dining room. Carlton moved beside her with surprising stealth, his expensive loafers replaced with tactical boots that made no sound on the hardwood floors. He gestured toward a hidden passage behind a bookshelf, a childhood secret that Palmer wouldn't know about, offering an alternative route to the library. A faded photograph hung crooked on the wall. Carlton as a teenager, standing proudly beside Palmer after a successful hunting trip, both smiling in a moment of genuine connection. Claire watched something flicker across Carlton's face as he straightened the frame with gentle fingertips, a silent acknowledgement of what had been lost. Mom's favorite room was always the library, Carlton whispered as they cleared the kitchen, encountering no resistance. 2nd floor, east wing. Palmer knows that too. The first gunshot shattered the silence as Carlton's team initiated their distraction at the front gate. Claire and Carlton used the momentary chaos to advance up the service stairs, encountering a lone guard whom Carlton neutralized with a precise strike to the throat. They found Eleanor Westbrook in the library as predicted, bound to a chair but remarkably composed, her elegant appearance barely disturbed despite her ordeal. Palmer stood behind her, a gun pressed to her temple, his eyes widening with surprise at seeing Claire alongside Carlton. The janitor? Palmer's voice cracked with disbelief as he stared at Claire, his grip on the gun momentarily loosening. You brought your cleaning lady to a hostage negotiation, Carlton. Eleanor Westbrook's eyes narrowed as she assessed Claire with remarkable composure despite her situation. Not a janitor, Gregory, she said calmly. Look at how she moves, how she holds herself. Military training. I'd wager special forces. Palmer's expression shifted from confusion to recognition as he reassessed the woman before him. The helicopter demonstration, he said slowly. That's when you realize she wasn't what she seemed, isn't it, Carlton? Carlton kept his weapon trained steadily on Palmer, his voice controlled despite the rage simmering beneath. Release her, Gregory. Your operation is finished. We've already alerted international authorities about the weapons components. Claire moved slightly to her left, establishing a better angle while keeping her movements subtle. The Singapore shipment was intercepted an hour ago, she added, watching Palmer's face drain of color as his carefully constructed world collapsed around him. You don't understand what you've done, Palmer hissed, desperation creeping into his voice. These people don't tolerate failure. They'll come for all of us now. I was protecting the family by giving them what they wanted. Eleanor let out a sharp laugh despite the gun at her head. Protecting the family? By trading weapons to terrorists? My husband would have put a bullet in you himself if he'd known what you were doing in his name. Palmer's hand began to shake, the gun wavering as his composure crumbled. I made this organization what it is today, while your husband was drinking himself to death and your son was playing businessman in his designer suits. I was securing our future. The distraction was all Claire needed. In one fluid motion, she launched a decorative paperweight from the desk beside her. It struck Palmer's wrist with precision, sending the gun clattering to the floor as Carlton surged forward to tackle his former mentor. Eleanor calmly stood from the chair, having freed herself from her restraints minutes earlier. I taught my son to always have a backup plan, Gregory, she said, retrieving the fallen weapon with manicured fingers, and to choose his allies more wisely than his father did. Within hours, Palmer was secured in the back of an unmarked van, bound for a private airfield where Claire's agency contacts waited to take him into custody. The evidence they had gathered would ensure he faced charges for international terrorism, rather than standard organized crime. Back at the Westbrook penthouse, Carlton stood at the window watching the sunrise paint the Manhattan skyline in gold and amber hues. Claire joined him silently, their reflections superimposed over the glittering cityscape like ghosts of their former selves. My organization needs restructuring, Carlton said finally, turning to face her. The legitimate businesses can be salvaged. The criminal operations dismantled gradually to avoid a power vacuum that would hurt innocent people caught in the crossfire. Morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in golden beams between them. Carlton had removed his tactical gear, now dressed in a simple black t-shirt that revealed muscled forearms marked with scars Claire hadn't noticed before, physical remnants of a life lived dangerously. Beyond the glass, New York continued its relentless rhythm, unaware of the seismic shift occurring in one of its most powerful criminal empires. Helicopter blades whirred in the distance, a sound that now connected them through that first confrontation that had changed everything. On the conference table lay Claire's badge and official credentials, finally revealed after months of deception. The laminated ID card showed a different woman, hair pulled back severely, eyes steely with purpose, almost unrecognizable from the person who now stood considering a future she hadn't planned for. Eleanor entered the room with quiet dignity, having exchanged her disheveled hostage attire for an impeccable cream suit. She placed a weathered leather folder on the table between Carlton and Claire, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the embossed family crest. "Your father's contingency plans," she explained to Carlton with a knowing look. "He always suspected Gregory might someday betray us." Claire nodded, understanding the complexity of the transition he was proposing. "And Palmer's terrorism connections need to be thoroughly investigated to ensure no other shipments are in transit," she added, already formulating the next steps of their unusual partnership. What had begun as an undercover operation had evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated. Claire found herself reluctant to walk away from this man who had revealed such unexpected depth beneath his ruthless exterior. "You never did follow through on your promise," she said with the ghost of a smile, breaking the serious mood that had settled between them. At his questioning look, she clarified, "You said if I flew your helicopter, you'd marry me." Carlton's laughter echoed through the penthouse, genuine, unguarded, transforming his face into something younger and lighter. "I'm a man of my word, Captain Harrison," he replied, his eyes holding hers with new warmth, "though I think we might want to get to know each other properly first." The future stretched before them, uncertain, but filled with possibilities neither had allowed themselves to imagine. A former Special Forces captain and a Mafia boss in the process of reformation. Unlikely allies turned something more, their story just beginning to unfold. As the morning light strengthened, Carlton reached for her hand, the gesture tentative yet full of promise. "Partners?" he asked simply, the word carrying layers of meaning beyond its surface. "Partners," Claire confirmed, her fingers intertwining with his, as they stood together at the threshold of a new beginning, their unlikely journey from that helicopter confrontation, having led them to a destination neither could have foreseen. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video, as your support is what keeps me creating content like this.